Do you do a podcast?
I've been on them. I don't host one, but it wasn't fair. I was back in the room. We're hiring too. My hand was up, but nobody could see it. It wasn't fair. My talk today is about context. This picture is a picture of somebody talking at Monitorama with a picture of somebody talking at Monitorama. And if there's one thing that motivates me more than anything, it's gamifying things. So Pete, do we have the picture? We good to go? We're good to go. Okay. Monitorama Inception is a new thing, so watch Twitter for it. All right. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this topic. I'm pretty passionate about it, and so I'd love to do a lot of hallway track as this goes on. So my goal here is to just generate ideas today. I work for a company in Minneapolis called SPS Commerce. I'm the director of system operations there, and that's my Twitter handle if you want to heckle me or have side conversation. So before we get too far into things, I wanted to stop real quick and say, Team Monitorama, this is awesome. Thanks for putting it on. Jason, this is such a cool event, great for the community. The value and diversity and everything else that you put into this is awesome. So thank you. And then a shout out to my team back in Minneapolis, in New Jersey, Toronto, Ukraine, India, Australia, everywhere they are. I like to consider myself I'm more the API gateway to all of the really awesome things they're doing. They did a lot of this awesome stuff, and a lot of the collaboration from that group is what built a lot of this. So thanks to all you folks. All right, I just want to level set on a few things that from my perspective, have really set up our industry in a unique way. So most of you have probably heard about digital transformation and the idea of it. Basically, technology is a competitive advantage more today than it's ever been. And so what that does is that creates this environment where velocity is winning. Right? If you ship fast and you ship often, you tend to be leading the pack in terms of against your competition. And a critical component to being able to do that is to reduce the friction of getting an idea to production. But additionally, performance wins. So it's really critical to reduce the risk of introducing change to your environment in a way that allows you to outperform your competitors, because it's super easy to fire a SaaS provider, right? We have to perform really effectively to maintain our customers. And I think Dora's released a lot of really interesting data around this lately, where these two tend to be more complementary once you get over this curve. But oftentimes, when you're introducing change at a high rate, it does challenge your ability to perform. So some basic things here when you're valuing velocity, you start to see more microservices architecture. You're probably using cloud services. You have some sort of CI/CD pipeline. You're likely looking at or running on platforms like Kubernetes or Mesos or something like that. But additionally, when you're valuing performance, we're all here to talk a lot about monitoring and observability tools. But other things that go into that are things like really good change management process, really good incident management process. You probably have some culture of continuous improvement if you're high performing, and have a way to leverage feedback cycles. But a lot of these things have brought these DevOps movements. You start to hear a lot about, and you heard a lot yesterday about SRE teams. Peter and Ian's talks both made it really obvious that at Fastly and Twitter, they're operating with these autonomous service team models, which is great for velocity, but sometimes can really challenge aspects about our system and introduce this idea of more complexity to enable our velocity. And that's something that's really challenging for all of us in this room to deal with on an ongoing basis. Change rates are higher than ever. SaaS tools are business critical, whether it's Micro Hub. They're going to rename it to that, right? Or something like that? No? Too soon? Get soft? Oh, come on, it's not. Is it all that bad? Show of hands, who thinks that's a bad thing? Less than half the room. That's impressive. I didn't think to ask that until now, but that was really interesting. All right, microservices are great for agility. Products and services depend highly on third parties. If you're on a cloud provider, you probably are using some other folks to do DNS. And meanwhile, legacy systems and tech debt still exist and are likely generating a lot of revenue. Unless, do they not exist anymore? Did I miss a memo? No? I was really hoping I did miss a memo there. But this creates this need for context. And this is something I was really interested in Logan's talk yesterday and Don's talk, because there's this kind of underlying theme of, wow, we have a lot to know to do our jobs really well. The quick Google definition of context: the circumstances that form the setting for an environment, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So I don't love the word fully in that definition, but overall I think that's a really solid definition. And if you think about how important context is for all of us to be successful at what we're doing in our jobs, and stepping back and looking at that, just some high-level research, things that show up a lot when you research how to be effective with context are you're doing things as an organization where you're asking the right questions. You have a culture of curiosity. But what this does to all of us, and everyone in the room is impacted by this, is there's significant mental demands on all of us. It was really interesting for Logan to start the conference yesterday talking about how do we maximize our ability to learn. We have so much we need to do, so much depends on our intuition. How do we maximize that to be as effective as we can be? And that's an important enough topic now that's something that is on this stage being discussed. Additionally, there's a lot of process. How many folks have a change management process that they have to follow to introduce any change to the environment? Right? How many people read the change management process document every single time you enter a change? Probably nobody. That's something that's stored away in your memory. And as Don was talking about yesterday, we have disk space capacity challenges with our memory, right? We have to think about what goes there. For example, I was really disappointed last night when I realized I still knew all the lyrics to Will Smith Getting Jiggy With It. I want that disk space really bad, but I can't have it. And then there's another really interesting concept right now, I think that's mentally demanding on all of us in technology, and that's this idea of continuous partial attention. Quick show of hands. I know I'm asking you to all raise your hands a lot. This is aerobics too. How many people in the last 5 minutes have looked at some sort of observability graph on their production systems or are looking at it right now? About 35, 40% of the room. And if you didn't, you might be doing that right now. Well, the point I'm trying to make there is that there's this concept called continuous partial attention where it's still taking up part of your mental cycles to be thinking about those things. Whether you're on call and you're going to bed at night and you're thinking, gosh, I hope I don't get woken up, or there's this one thing that has been breaking a lot at night. I hope that doesn't bother me tonight. That's stuff that's consuming mental cycles. And so we have to think about ways to build more efficiencies around us so that there's not such a demand on us for some of these other things, or at least alleviate some of that demand. So I was really happy yesterday in Logan's talk where she commissioned an artist to do a decent amount of really cool graphics for her talk. I also did the same thing. His name is Andy D. He works for cheap, and he's terrible with an Apple Pencil. But I wanted to illustrate something that I think is really interesting in today's space. So one of the things that I believe in pretty strongly right now is that when you think about your environment, wherever you are, as the complexity of your environment increases, the amount of context in your environment is increasing as well. So I think there's this idea that there's a certain amount of context available to you and your organization and your team that you need to stop and think about what you're doing with that context. So from a context perspective, when I say context, things I'm thinking about here are there's monitoring data, there's observability information, there's incident management data, you have documentation, you have change management and performance-related data, and there's lots of people that carry a ton of context. From a complexity perspective, your architecture matters a ton. You might be on a microservices path, you might be monolithic, you might be both moving towards one. You probably have some stuff in the cloud or you're thinking about it. You have third-party dependencies. You might be running on a platform like Kubernetes. Are you doing a service mesh? Are you going to do DNS differently? You probably have a high rate of change. Your org structure is a huge complexity barrier. Who do you need to talk to get a change out? What kind of dependencies does that require? Are you an autonomous service team? But then how do you integrate back to the SRE team? Tech debt. Right? There's a huge amount of things out there that people don't want to touch unless they have to, and hopefully they're documented. Sometimes they're not. And I think we can all agree that AV is probably the most complex thing we all deal with. And the conference folks here are doing an amazing job at AV. Well done. But whoa, like this is a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot to think about here. And so I think when you look at companies that are easier to put on a pedestal, like Netflix or Twitter, and some of those others, it's really easy, I think, to make this statement, which is the efficiency of an organization can be directly correlated to how effective you are with your available context. So in Ian's talk yesterday, it was great. Like they were talking about at Twitter, this giant a tech giant with some really interesting complex technologies all share the same monitoring tool. Think about how much context is shared in that environment because everybody's interfacing with the same tools. They're interfacing with the same query languages to figure out how to solve a problem together. They know how to go look at the health of each other's services because they're familiar with the tool. That's really interesting, and that's a way that they've been effective with their context. But we don't all have that luxury in a lot of scenarios. There's people that, there's wars around Prometheus versus StatsD or what logging solution's better. And some people just will not let go of tailing the log. But at the end of the day, I think one of the things we need to think about in our industry is making it a goal to make the right context available at the right time. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of information out there. And connecting one more time back to Logan's talk, I think that we do have to think about how to maximize our learning efficiencies and maximize how we're operating our brains in a way that we have the right things loaded. But there's a lot of stuff that you don't need to know more than once every 3 months or more than once every 6 months. But it might be important. That doesn't mean that we can't figure out different ways to make that information relevant at the right time. So to talk a little bit about how I think we can think about this more is like the different types of context that we have available today. So the first one and the most important one is the people. How many people in this room know something about their system that they know only maybe 2 or 3 other people know, and they know it's not documented anywhere? Almost everyone in this room. How important is communication to us? I gave this talk in Minneapolis, and there was somebody at a DevOps meetup, and there was somebody in the room. It was their first day, and they raised their hand. I guess that's good context sharing, right? Maybe good onboarding. You'll never find this, so learn it now. But context is so important. I pinged Allspa on Twitter because I was thinking about this more and thinking about how close he is to the whole incident space and incident review, not root cause, Jason, and asked him what his perspective was, and his response was that fully in the definition is a bit problematic. But what really struck me about his response was because context is constructed from perspective. So we all raised our hands because we know something about our systems that isn't documented, and it's important. But if somebody else knows that same thing, they might know it slightly differently. Their perspective is slightly different. And arguably, everybody in this room has a completely different perspective so far of the talk I've given, even though we're in the same room, because it's a matter of perspective. And so this ability for us to communicate effectively about the things that we own and share is so important. And I also think that's why when you see folks like Twitter talk about using the same tool, there's a ton of organizational velocity behind what the people gain by just being on a consistent platform. The next type of context is the predefined metrics and thresholds. This is monitoring and alerting. This is everybody's wheelhouse that's here. It's all of the things that you can predefine that you know matter to you. The next part's observability. Everyone's pretty familiar with this space as well. Really just the discoverability of things that you care about. And then the last part I'd say is the obscure and hard to find things. It's difficult, it's time consuming. These are usually the things, if you go after this context, you regret it 2 weeks later when you're finally done. And then 6 months later, when you never use it, you get really sad. So there's a certain level of context that's just not worth chasing, but it's out there. So I want to talk about each of these sections a little bit. But one of the things that my point here is that I think everyone's at a different part of the complexity line here, and that's going to dictate, depending on your tools, you might have more of the people side, or more of the monitoring side, or less of the observability side. Everyone's in a different spot. But the point is you have context, and you should really think about where it is, how you're interacting with it, how you're using it efficiently. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the things we've done at SPS. So this is much more just storytelling, some stuff we've done. And I'm hoping that it's really interesting to you, thought-provoking, and potentially things that you can either bring back to think about making your own way, or maybe it makes you think about this space differently and you have different ideas, in which case I'd love to talk about those. So first, on the people side, something that we've recently adopted at SPS is a term that came out with a book Susan Fowler produced called Operational Readiness. I was fortunate enough to catch her talk at Velocity, New York a few years ago. And the basic idea here is there's a base set of consistent values for service delivery that give you context about the application, and it enables you to make decisions. So similar to Twitter having the one monitoring app, what we're trying to do at SPS is have like one consistent set of readiness values. And the idea there is then as an organization, our terminology is the same, the things we care about are the same. We can talk between service teams and other things around that and have that context loaded without having to figure out, like, what do you mean by KPI? Well, I mean request rate. What do you mean by KPI? Well, I mean user count, whatever. So the way that we've done it is we've broken it out into 4 pillars: operational information, who owns this, where's it deployed, where are its logs, where are the different services that are alerting. Performance-related data, so how do you define your key performance metrics? Maybe, typically we'll go with red metrics, request errors duration. Where are they? Give us a link to a data point in Prometheus or something like that. And then additionally, cost is a big one if you're in the cloud. How you figure out how to manage your cost performance is a really interesting thing to think about. Agility is another pillar there. So basically the idea here is how effective are you at changing? Have you invested a lot into automated testing? Do you have automated rollback? Do you do blue-green deploy? Architecture and resiliency play into that as well. And then the last one, security, is pretty cool. I know some of my security team's streaming this, so I wanted to make sure that I got in front of them. Right, Ted? Okay. No, but what data class is relevant to this app? Do you need to be PCI compliant? Are you HIPAA? Are you doing specific things with your creds? Do you have different options? So everyone's got a different set of things here, but this is how we've approached it. And what we've started doing is loading this into a system that we can care about over time. And so what we're doing is we're carrying this forward to this concept that we call operational confidence or confidence reporting. And the tagline around this is basically, if it's important at readiness, it's important over time. And so we're able to start, we're still building out our data sets, but we're able to really step back and say, okay, what's our change rates, what's our success rates, what's our incident rates across these different services? 200%, this team's deploying over twice a day. And they're doing a great job. So what are they doing that other people aren't? Can we go back and look at other aspects of what they had in readiness and derive some sort of consistent values into that? And it's been really interesting. But the idea here is, I think anyone can look at the concept of operational readiness and say, yeah, great, you can sit down and have a conversation with a bunch of stakeholders about a new service you're deploying, but 2 days later, that documentation is going to be stale. It's going to be out of date. There's going to be something wrong with it. And so our hope is that with confidence reporting and caring about these things over time, we maintain that information. And some of what we're trying to do there is we're trying to do this concept of a maturity model. So we have our pillars here, and I just drafted this up for demo, but maybe your app is the red line, and the green line is the company average, or maybe that's the bar that's set for you. So now as a service owner or somebody trying to plan, you can stop and say, okay, well, what should we do to move closer to the bar for security? What kinds of things can we do? And now you're having a really data-driven conversation in your planning process to talk about where you're going to make investments with your engineering effort, and it's really tangible. So something I didn't really think about until a couple days ago was the fact that we had a really cool community here, and operational readiness means something completely different to everybody. So I wanted to take a shot at this and see what happens, but readiness has been a really cool effort for us, and I thought, let's see if it could be something that's more of a community effort. I don't know how well this will stick or not, but if you're passionate about the space or if you have ideas, I just started something really generic out on GitHub and would love to carry a conversation forward there. Maybe we can build some momentum behind some concept of a community readiness definition, and we can expand what I think we're seeing at SPS as organizational velocity around these things to community velocity around these things and really start to standardize on a couple ideas. So I don't know where that's going to go at SPS. We currently have things in a YAML file, and everybody yesterday laughed about how terrible YAML was several times. So I'm open to everything. PR it and change the layout, do whatever, but I think it could be interesting. If folks are interested, I thought, why not give it a try? All right, so the next section is monitoring. And Charity recently posted this on Twitter. I thought it was a great tweet. I tried to send her single malt in an email attachment, and I think it failed. But I tried to pay. So I think one of the things that I kind of boil this down to, with the way Charity said, is monitoring is really about taking action, and observability is about enabling discovery. And we've talked a lot about a lot of these things already this conference, but when we talk about taking action, we talk a lot about service health, dashboarding, alerting, what are some of the systems, but some things we haven't talked about yet are business events. What kind of change events carry relevant context to you? I mean, how many people in the last month have responded to an incident that was caused by change to their environment? Probably a decent amount of us. And so thinking about some of those things that are interesting. So I figured instead of going into some of the things we've done contextually around availability and that kind of monitoring, I could share a few of the things that we've done around business events. because that's just as much context as mentally taxing to us as other things. So I'm going to fly through these, but at a high level, what we did is we said, hey, you know, when alerts go off, there's probably some automation. There's some things we'd want to do. There's relevant context we care about. And so one of the first things we did was we built this webhook that basically got our alerts onto an SNS topic. So now what we could do is we could write Python Lambda functions or any kind of simple functions that are listening to this SNS topic and automate action, but we're inside our network too, so we can do some pretty interesting things. The most basic one we've done so far that has proven to be pretty interesting is just the basic idea of saying, well, when an alert goes off, there's a certain amount of documentation that's sometimes useful, especially to level 1 folks. So why don't we just do that search for them, and then why don't we just post it back to the alert for them? Pretty basic. I think a lot of the alerting companies actually are already doing this within their platform to begin with, so it's a pretty common pattern. It makes a lot of sense. But now we're set up really well to say, what ideas do you have? Do you have anything that you would do in response to alerts, and how could you build that and share it in a way that pushes context or does something interesting back to the rest of your team members? The next one we've done, so we do our incident management workflow process in Jira. So we still have alerting systems, but when it comes to like a larger scale incident record, we do a lot of that and leverage Jira's workflow. But we did the exact same thing here and said, let's just dump this event on SNS. How many people here have some sort of communication tree that's complicated, and depending on what service is down, triggers which executives you need to call or which management teams or service teams you need to call? Triggering in a complex way. So we had something similar here, and so we had this idea where we said, well, we can put some configuration in there that's really more about just notifying stakeholders in general and notifying the business in general for specific scenarios, specific events. But then one of the things that, like, as we increase our change rates, one of the things that's always really interesting within incidents is what's changed recently? Why is this thing suddenly broken right now? And so we took that idea a bit further and said, well, we know how to ask if there's been any changes in this service recently, so why don't we just ask that and then post it back to the incident? So one of the things that can automatically happen within our environment is if there's an incident created, if there's changes for it, we try to post that back to the incident as context that's immediately valuable. Now, for you as an engineer who might be on call, you don't need to sit there and track like every single change that's going into the environment. That's something that gets pushed to you later. And hopefully that's something that reduces the mental demand that's placed on you. Same thing here. Do you have other ideas? We can plug them in. So lastly, we're starting to think about how we use our operational data. This is much more proof of concept still, but the general idea here is we have dependencies now in our service data as well. So we can ask it questions and say, well, gosh, if I'm going to make a change, who's dependent on me? Or if I have an incident broken, what other products are probably broken as a result? And add that data back with some of the same functions we've already written. So this is just maybe a different way to think about monitoring in terms of like taking action and pushing context to people who need it to solve problems. And if we wanted to, we could probably plug that in back into alerting as well. So jumping into observability real quick. If you don't follow Sydney's blog posts, you should. They're amazing. But at a high level, observability is all about enabling discovery, right? This is the most important graph at SPS when it comes to service health, and it just represents, well, we process supply chain data. We're a communications network for supply chain data. And so we're always processing a lot of data. And this graph just represents the different channels that flow through our system. And it's a canary test that's looping, saying how fast are these channels processing data. But they exercise a lot of services. And so this line going off gives us the context that the system's unhealthy, but it doesn't necessarily tell us which of the 1,000 things are unhealthy, which is a terrible thing to be woken up by. Like, one of 1,000 things is broke. Thanks. Cool. But as our environments get complex, they get more complex. This is, you've probably seen this before. This is the Amazon microservices architecture. I stole this from Chris Munn's talk that he gave in 2015. I'm pretty sure S3's right there. But most importantly, the status page where you can look at S3's results is right there. What you can't tell by this graph is that they're directly dependent on each other. So when S3 goes down, the status page doesn't tell you that. And Amazon had a significant burden of communication the day that they had that most recent S3 outage because nobody had validation it was down. Like, that context was not available. So not only did they lack the ability to build contextually this idea that they needed to figure out how to proactively do something about their status page because they didn't recognize that S3 being down was causing this issue on their status page. But now they had all this context they needed to push out to all of us who were using it. That was a really expensive problem in terms of time during one of arguably the most critical production concerns that they've had in the most recent years. So it matters a lot how we think about this. And I have to give my CTO, Jamie, a lot of credit for getting me into Edward Tufte. But this is something I don't think we talk about enough in this industry, is this idea of visual literacy. So the definition here is the ability to interpret, negotiate, and make meaning from information presented in the form of an image. This guy's a genius. And one of the things that he talks a lot about is this graphic. Has anyone ever seen this before? I am fascinated by this. So this is, Charles Menard drew this diagram a long time ago. It's about Napoleon's march in 1812. And one of the most interesting things about it, it's renowned as like this awesome graphic because it's a two-dimensional chart, but it has six different types of data in it. So the width of the line going this way is the number of troops that Napoleon had. The tan is going into Russia, the black is leaving Russia, so there's directionality. All these lines here showing latitude, longitude, as well as the temperature. It's kind of interesting, like they're coming back in the middle of the winter, and like you see them when they hit rivers, they lose a significant number of troops as they're trying to cross these rivers in the winter. But you can build a ton of context from this. There's so much that once you learn how to read it, you can do a lot with that right away. So I think when we talk about observability, that needs to be one of our goals, is thinking about how do we effectively visualize and communicate these data points out to folks in a way that makes sense. This doesn't make a lot of sense unless we explain what it's all about. I think a tool that's pretty cool, an open source tool that Netflix built a while back called Visceral, does something really similar to this. And we gave an implementation of it a shot at SPS. We built this tool that we call the observatory that takes in our monitoring data and helps us populate Visceral. You guys want to see something cool? Yes, all right. We're going to try this then. I renamed everything, but this is Visceral at SPS Commerce. You can tell I renamed things based on my childhood. There's Mario, Air Supplies over there. But this is very similar in terms of how you could think about effectively or efficiently visualizing data. So there's that yellow dot going from Mario to Babylon 5 right now. Don't ask me why. They have a dependency on each other. But and I didn't even know you were going to be here, Christian. But the yellow dot represents a particular air type. If you see at some point on the graph, you might see red dots. That's a much harder failure. A yellow dot is basically a handled failure. But the idea here is, it's maybe not the most easy to make sense of, but in general, if you're trying to respond to general system health, you can identify, if there's a high error rate, that's really easy to identify here. Or potentially if there is a situation where you have a node. So like some of the other things that we're able to do here, so our friend Mario here, you can see how many dependencies Mario has right now. We're not particularly happy with that, and we're working on changing some of those things. But we can get into very specific data on Mario itself in terms of like the duration it's taking to process things. So we're pushing in node level metrics, and we can also basically color code those nodes with alarms. So not only can the streams be and the traffic be color coded, and these dots represent documents processing through our system, but the nodes themselves can be color coded as well. So there's really instant context that we can derive from this. What surprised me a lot in this experiment was the folks that really disliked this program were the ones closest to this system. And it was really interesting. I hadn't thought through that until we got it out the door, where this was everything connecting back to Loganstock. This was intuition for them, right? A person on day one didn't understand any of this, but folks that had been there a long time knew this. They knew exactly what dashboard to go look at to see where service mix, service faces, service health is. And so they were really easily able to navigate some of those things where others weren't. And so they ended up really disliking this for a while because we'd have the CTO or somebody else would walk by and say, hey, what's this yellow dot all about? And they'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter. You have too much context now. Quit asking me questions. It was very unexpected. So think about that if you go down the route of some sort of observability project like that. But that one's been really interesting. I think we're going to try to do something similar for our web service calls too. Those are all like transaction processing, but that has been pretty fun. So wrapping up here, I think the one thing I'd really like to challenge everybody in this room with as you leave this conference is think about the fact that you all have your own context. Your context is way different than the context we have at SPS because your systems, your people, your perspectives, everything are different. And your environment's different. Your complexity is unique to your own environment. So really, if nothing else, I'd like to challenge you to think about how you can help your organization be more effective with the context you have. Thank you very much.